begin.
Hello and welcome to the 129th Melbourne AWS User Group meetup. Thank you, everybody, for coming. To start, I just wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. Our in-person meetup is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land. We pay our respect to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Similarly, I want to remind everybody this meetup is run with a code of conduct. A short version is here. A longer version is on the website. A very short version is basically be nice to each other. So I'm sure we're all nice people here, and let's keep it that way. You can find us on the web in various places. Obviously on meetup.com, which is where you all are, but also we have a website. We're on LinkedIn, where we post announcements and stuff for, hey, next meetup is coming. Mastodon, which we use for the exact same thing. And YouTube, where you can watch the live stream of this very nice meetup, as well as recordings of all our past ones. We used to have Twitter on there as well, but Twitter doesn't exist anymore, so that's an easy one to remove. As for today, see that you've come here all together. Introductions is what I'm doing right now, so it's all good. Then we'll have a What's New section, where I will be joined by Jason at the back, and we'll discuss the news that AWS, all the new stuff that AWS brought us in the past month. Spoiler, it's not as much as some other months. Well, there's plenty, it's just not all interesting. What is interesting, though, is our two speakers, or two talks. We'll start with Andrew about debugging difficult conversations, and that is followed by Lorenzo about safe auto-remediation in AWS. Both of these sound very interesting to me, so I'm really looking forward to them. We also have, as usual, at the very end of the night, a marketplace, which is basically people can hold up their hands, say that they're hiring, and they can be approached afterwards. And the reason we do it this way instead of people people standing up and saying, hey, I'm looking for work, is because it's always possible that you're here with your manager or your boss or something, and it might be a little bit awkward if you don't stand up and say, hey, I'm looking for a new job because I don't like this guy next to me. Then we'll close, can hang around for a little bit, but then we'll be politely asking everybody to leave so that we can also go home. And that's the schedule for tonight. Rob already mentioned it earlier. If you have a question for our speakers, generally we leave questions for the end, but if the speaker themselves says it's fine to ask throughout, then go for that. But wait for a microphone so that the people in the live stream or watching the recording can hear can actually hear the question. If you're watching this online live, you can ask questions in our Slack or in the YouTube chat, and we'll ask the question for you. Of course, I want to thank our sponsors, without whom this is not possible. They provide the food, the drink. Our gold sponsor for 2023 is CMD Solutions, which is part of Mental Group, which these days I'm supposed to mention. And our silver sponsors are Versant and Civo. And of course, NAB provides this beautiful venue where we can always have, well, you're here, you know how great it is. I mentioned Slack earlier, that's on our website. Come join us there. I think we've got about 1,000 people in the Slack group now. There can be quite interesting discussions. We also have some specific channels around news, jobs, AWS outages, all kind of things. So, also, we're always looking to get more done with the meetup. So you can speak. Obviously, we're always looking for speakers. We have speakers for next month, but we're still looking for speakers the rest of the year. So please reach out if you have an idea for a talk. Every talk is a good talk, generally. If you want to talk about Azure, you might not be in the right venue. We're not currently looking for sponsors, but it's likely that by next month that will change and we'll be opening up sponsorship for next year. And if you just want to be involved in some way, help us with preparing the nights, things like that, reach out and we'll see what is possible. Upcoming events. You may have heard of this one, reInvent. Big thing in Vegas. It's not cheap to get there or to get a ticket for it itself, but it also has an online component. Is anybody here planning to go to reInvent in person? See, one and a maybe. Cool. It is a lot of fun. If you ever get the chance to go, you definitely should. It's a whole week of hanging out with people, well, like us, but then 25,000 of them. A bit closer to home, tomorrow, so I don't actually know if there's any tickets available, but the Data Bytes conference is right here at the edge on Federation Square. This conference already ran in Sydney, Brisbane and Perth over the past few weeks. if, like I said, I don't know if there's anything still available. If there is, I'd say you might want to check it out. Be quick. Other things, the AWS Programming Tools Meetup is back on Wednesday the 13th of September about Code Whisperer, where Daniel Drenton will talk about things. And the serverless meetup will be back on the 21st of September at my office. It's CMD Mentor Group. They are still looking for speakers, so if you are interested in giving a talk about something serverless, reach out to the organizers. Unfortunately, they couldn't come tonight, so I can't point them out to you. But on meetup.com, you can easily reach out. And that's that part. So I'll have Jason join me, and we'll tell you all about the fun stuff that AWS brought us this month. To start, of course, with the one thing that we all care about, what has finally come to Melbourne. So I think the big one here is, well, the Graviton instances for the databases. In case you're not as familiar, Graviton instances are basically the ARM versions, which usually run cheaper. And as it's a managed database, you wouldn't care what it runs on. So this is a good way to have some cost savings.
Yeah, because is this working? Usually the Gravitrons, you need to see if your stuff works, but as Ian said, since this is their managed RDS, it's going to work. Save some dollars.
Yep. The other things that are here are transit float logs. It's good if you need to do any debugging for, hey, what's going wrong here? Does anybody here have to work with VMware Cloud on AWS? My apologies.
Not not directly, but there are teams within Telstra that do. So that was a big one within our side of things.
Yeah. And the last one is Glue, which is a great service for serverless data processing. So definitely glad to see that one. Sydney didn't get as much love. They got Monitron, which is still a cool sounding name, and not something most of us will actually use.
No. If you have factories, you might do that, which is probably one of the good things for that. Monitron, you do need to have SSO in the region where your Monitron is. So, we've had people that were testing it out and had to have their SSO in US. So now they can have it in Sydney and actually have their SSOs in Sydney.
Yep. And because we didn't quite mention it, Monitron is like a camera. So think deep lens, but on a broader scale and not deprecated.
Yeah.
On the data side, there's really only one here that I personally cared about, which was announced early this morning, and that is local time zone support for AWS backup. So in case you're not aware of it, up until this morning, if you wanted to set up a backup schedule using AWS backup, you had to use UTC for that, which is, on the one hand, it's both annoying that you have to calculate, and on the other hand, it also means that likely every 6 months you need to update your schedule so that they still run at the same time for us.
Yeah, and that whole, daylight saving thing with UTC, was annoying. So local time zones, awesome.
Machine learning had a couple of smaller things. Nothing really here that stands out to me personally.
Yeah.
So we'll just skip through that one. Networking does have a pretty big one.
Yeah, well, too. I mean, probably the biggest one from my mind is NLB supporting security groups. That's massive. No more having to stuff around with knuckles to try and put some security around your NLBs. So yeah, that's a big one. That's yes.
Yep, that definitely made a lot of people's days when that was announced. In case you're not aware, up until this announcement, you couldn't add security groups to NLBs, which meant that all the stuff that usually is done by security groups on like application load balancer for filtering of IPs would be done on your instances or containers or whichever you're running.
Or knuckles.
Yep.
No. Yeah, set up. And that was, it's so much easier if you don't have to play with knuckles. Yep. Network.
They also
ACLs.
they've also done some fun things with private link that you can turn parts of this off. So definitely worth looking into the actual documentation for the best way to use it for your own use case.
Yep, definitely. And look, the Global Accelerator support the client IP address preservation for NLBs. So yeah, that's not a bad one as well if you're using that. So
yep. On the storage side, there's a bunch of smaller ones. I have to technically mention it here as well, although I've already told one client that they shouldn't use it. Mount Point for Amazon S3 is now GA. This is basically AWS's solution to use S3 as a file system. It's technically possible. That is not the same as it being a good idea. Okay?
Yeah. So, remember your buckets are object storage, your file systems are block storage, and they're that way for a reason. If you have a specific reason for accessing your object storage from your server, great. If you can't answer what is your specific use case for this, other than, S3 is cheap, rethink.
Yep. The other one here that is a good one is something that's similar that we had several years ago for EFS, which is that FSX for Windows file server now has IOPS scaling separately from storage. Basically, again, up until now, if you wanted to increase the IOPS for your FSX, you would need to add more data. I know that when it was the case with EFS, that usually ended up with people putting 100 gigabyte files on the EFS just to get higher IOPS. So it's always a good thing that you can just now tick a box and get the higher IOPS without needing to have ugly hacks like that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good one. And then, just some general other speed increases. And you can now have 128 EBS volumes attached to an EC2. So Oracle DBAs are probably happy now.
Can they be happy? So on security side, private CA has connectors for Active Directory. Basically, it can do magic there, which is nice. And some enterprise controls, stuff like that. I haven't looked too closely into these.
Yeah, well, they're nice to haves, but not super. But the private CAs. So if you use private CAs, you can now connect up to your AD and use those private and manage the private certificates there. So it's not bad.
Yep. On the DevOps side, there's a whole bunch of things here. One that, again, I personally really like is the one at the very bottom here, which is a new deletion policy for CloudFormation. retain, accept, uncreate. Basically, what you had in the past is you would have either retain or delete as options for this. What this one means is basically you can say, okay, if you give the retain, accept, uncreate deletion policy, if you set that on a database, then if your stack fails the very first time you try to create it, it will delete the database. But it won't do that if something goes wrong during an update. The good thing there is that it means while you're developing, you don't get stuck with databases or other services that you want to retain once they are actually deployed, but not need to deal with them constantly manually deleting.
Yeah, and you've got that benefit that if they already exist and you're doing an update that doesn't work out, it's going to keep it there and it won't try and delete the database when it rolls back. The other thing that was interesting as well, the air-gapped AWS backup. So, just if you want to sort of DR your backup, it gives you sort of something separate for that. So, and Code Pipeline supporting GitLab, so it's another option to trigger off your pipelines.
Yeah, Code Pipeline has had quite a bit of love recently. So this now GitLab, but I think last month was support for GitHub Actions, things like that. So yeah, it's like they suddenly remembered that it exists and they should add some good features to it.
Yeah, the rest are all nice to haves.
Yep. Some other cool stuff. New instance type, M7A. This is the AMD version of the 7th generation. So only the Intel instances are lagging in having a 7th generation, as well as SSD optimized versions of the Graviton 7th gen instances.
Yes, the D for disk. And we're learning all of our new acronyms or our new codes. But yeah, so yeah, good news. Dedicated local zone. So that's going to be an interesting one. It's sort of, when you've sort of between your outposts and a local zone. So yeah, it'd be. I think there's some talk about that. Some, people saying like, yeah, maybe instead of having a rack, which your outpost is, maybe it's now a cage.
Yeah. So my understanding of this is literally, as Jason said, it's somewhere between having your own outposts or running things in a local zone. So I'm not entirely clear on the details, but basically, my understanding is that AWS will put like an outpost rack into a data center of your choice.
Yeah.
Which can be very convenient, so it can be right next to any other servers you might be running there, or any servers that you want to get rid of, replacing those. I'm sure there is a lot of security issues, requirements from AWS for that, as there always are. Read the fine print, which probably also includes a hefty dollar tag.
Yeah, and it will be all managed by AWS as well.
Yep.
Managed by your local AWS team, as the blurb says.
And the last one I want to mention here, because it made at least one of my colleagues very happy, is you can now run the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise on your workspaces, which before was not allowed by Microsoft. And I guess AWS struck a deal with them that it's now allowed. I think it's both bring your own license as well as paying through the nose through Amazon to get your Microsoft licenses. And that's the highlight of the news. So I think it's time for our first speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So, I can read your bio. That's fine. You provided it. Okay. Originally from the UK, but now based in Melbourne. Andrew started out as a software developer and has been writing code for over 22 years. He talks about topics that he's passionate about, shares his experience, and teaches the skill that software managers, tech leads, consultants, and heads of department need to succeed as a leader in technology. As a technical leadership coach, he also enjoys mentoring other people to help them navigate the path of leadership in the technical world so that they can get the success they want in their careers. That is beautifully written.
Seems to be working well. Yeah. Cool. So before we go into the meat of what I want to talk about tonight, I want to give you a story about why I put this particular presentation together and what it means for me every time I do this. I got into leadership really, really early. I was an engineer fresh out of university, and by the time I was 24 years old, I was running a team of 10 people. And I don't say that to say, am I a good leader? Because I was not. I was bad. I made a lot of mistakes as a really young leader, an absolute massive amount of mistakes. And the biggest mistake I made was related to the topic of the talk tonight, which is difficult conversations. I'd recently hired somebody to my team. They were somebody who were the prototypical really smart engineer, but were just not a culture fit for the team. You know, this type of person who thinks they're the 10x engineer when really they're the 0.1 engineer. And my best engineer at the time told me that this person wasn't the right fit, and if I didn't get rid of them, she would leave. Guess what I didn't do? I didn't talk to that person. I didn't tell them that they needed to solve the issues, and my best engineer quit. About a week later, my boss pulled me into a meeting room, and he said, "Andrew, come sit down. What do you think your job is?" When your boss pulls you into a private meeting room and asks you to describe what your job is, it's not going to be a good conversation. So being the young, naive 24-year-old that I was, I said, "My job is to write code." And he was like, Nah. You're a lead engineer, Andrew. You're a lead engineer. What's your job?" Thought about it for a little bit longer. Lead engineer. I got this. To write really good code. Nah. This could have turned into the end of my leadership career. Luckily for me, it didn't. My boss took me under his wing and taught me what it meant to be a leader. And I thank that boss every time I see him. Every time I go back to the UK, and I thank him. Because he turned me into the leader that I became. Because he taught me to understand the power of difficult conversations and why I'd failed to have that difficult conversation with the people that were involved. So this is what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to go through the what and why of difficult conversations. What are they and why should we have them? I'm going to give you a model to take away and think about, which is based on mindset and preparation, and then a worksheet that you can use, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So who am I? Who is this person that is stood in front of you? Freezing. Last time I did this, I used a Windows computer, and it worked flawlessly. Now I'm using a Mac. I'm Andrew, as was said in my intro. I'm a long-term father of a flock of chucks, or as we call them in England, chickens. Short-term father of a flock of humans, or as we call them in England, financial burdens. And I love travel and I love adventure, and that's going to come back in a story later on in the presentation. This is really not working. You get to see me scroll. How fun is that? From a professional point of view, like I said in my intro, I've been an engineer for about 20 odd years at this point, and got into leadership incredibly early and made all of the mistakes that I told you about. I made a massive amount of mistakes. And so what I like to do now, and the focus of my career now, is to make sure other people don't have to make the same mistakes that I made. I want people to learn from my experiences and the experiences of other great leaders out there to teach the skills that I wish I knew when I became an engineering leader. And so that's what my company, Tech Leaders Launchpad, does. So this is not going to be a I stand here for 30 minutes and talk at you type of presentation. I want to make this interactive. This is not going to be a monologue. It's going to be a dialogue. And so there are certain points when I'll say to you, please give me your responses. And for the benefit of those online, I will repeat people's answers. This is the first one. When I say the phrase difficult conversations to you, what crops up in your mind? Fighting someone. Yeah. Anybody else? Negative, yeah. They can sometimes be negative, the way we think about them. Anybody else? When you mess up, prod. Yeah, definitely. That can be a difficult conversation. Right at the back. Confrontational. Tell me why you think it's confrontational. Tension, awkwardness, yeah, definitely. What about some examples of difficult conversations? So we've had telling your boss you broke prod. What are some other examples? Performance feedback, definitely. That can be a really difficult conversation. Anybody else? Quality of work, yeah, definitely. One more? Sorry? Redundancy, yeah. Unfortunately happening a lot right now. So the way that I like to think about difficult conversations are they either have high stakes or high emotions involved in them. There's either a high impact to the way the difficult conversation goes, or there's high emotions involved in the conversation. So if we think about some examples of what that means, it can be giving feedback, like we just said. It can be having a presentation. You might not believe this as somebody whose job is to stand in front of people and talk, but I am an introvert. I'm going to crash this evening hard. Standing up in front of you and talking for 30 minutes is going to drain all of my energy. That's definitely high emotions. Influencing people, encouraging people of your point of view or a particular point of view is a difficult conversation. No, I'm not going to go through all of these. Interviewing is a difficult conversation, both for you being interviewed and for the interviewer. It's difficult to interview people and get it right. There's a lot of impact, a lot of stakes involved in hiring the right people as a leader, and so it's a difficult conversation for them. And for you, your career depends on the decision that they make and the decision that you make, and so it's definitely a high stakes, high emotions conversation. So all of these are things that I teach people how to do better. And I realize that there's a commonality between all of them. There's things that you can pick out of every single one of these difficult conversations. And so I came up with a model that makes you be better at any of these. So there are some models for giving feedback to people. Who's heard of the SBI model of giving feedback? Anybody? Nope. Yep. A couple of people. There are great books written on giving presentations and influencing people, but there's still something that's the same between all of them, and that's what I wanted to uncover and talk about. But before we get into that, I like to give a little bit of fear to audiences. What happens if we don't have difficult conversations? Misunderstandings, yeah, definitely. Anybody else? Sorry? Frustration, yeah. Anybody else? Team tension? Yeah, so the point there was, isn't this very similar to if you're in a relationship with somebody, a personal relationship? Yes, definitely. A lot of these people skills are relevant whether you're the person you're working with is a boss, an employee, a colleague, or whether they're a friend or somebody you're in a relationship with. Teaching people to use these skills, it doesn't matter how you use them. A lot of people at this point will say things will stay the same. And that's true, but another thing that can happen is things will get worse. Often if we ignore these things, if we know that we have to give somebody performance feedback, if we know that we have to tell somebody that they need to change the way they're doing something, we can go, oh, I'm not going to do that. That sounds like a difficult thing to do. But if we delay it, and we delay it, and we delay it, hoping that it'll go away, it can actually end up getting worse. And a story I want to tell about that, remember I said I'd cycle back to the traveling? This is my one regret moving to Australia. Genuinely, I have zero regrets, but this vehicle, I left it in the UK. I'm not a big car guy, I'm really, really not. But has anybody ever had a car that just walking past it made you smile? Not even getting in it, not even driving it, just walking past it and knowing it was yours made you smile. This was that car to me, and I left it in the UK. I regret. Anyway, so I used to take this car all over Europe. I had a goal pre-COVID. I had a goal, which was to visit 2 new countries every year. I did that every year from my 18th birthday to COVID. Sounds really impressive, but when you live in Europe, it's not that hard. Just drive in a circle. Interestingly enough, I'm back on the bandwagon. This year I've visited 2 new countries, and I'll visit 2 more before the end of the year. So I'm trying to make up for lost time. But I used to take this car out into Europe all the time on road trips. And before I do the road trip, I used to do like a pre-drive check, like a pre-flight check. Just check the car, make sure it's okay. If you're going on a 5,000-6,000 mile drive, you just want to do a little bit of a check of the vehicle. So I checked the vehicle, did everything that I normally do, and I noticed that there was a bit of oil on the ground. For those of you who own a Land Rover, you're probably thinking, well, yes, it's a Land Rover. If a Land Rover isn't leaking oil, it probably means it's run out of oil. But this was a little bit more than I was expecting. A little bit more. Not enough to cause me huge concern, but enough to be noticeable. But I was excited for my trip. I wanted to go. So I drove. I was driving down the French motorway at 100 kilometers an hour, and suddenly I hear this noise coming from under the vehicle while I'm driving. And I think, I'll be fine. It's just a stone got caught in the wheel, or something got caught in the prop shaft. It'll be fine. So I keep driving. Get to Luxembourg, and I hear this, and the whole car screeches to a halt on the side of the freeway in Luxembourg. Take it to a garage. I'm very lucky in this story, by the way. This is a true story. Very lucky. I break down a mile from a Land Rover specialist garage. So I limp there, and I get there. And they look at it, and not only am I lucky enough that they have a Land Rover specialist garage, they also have exactly the part that I need. I'd broken the transfer box. For those of you who know about cars, I'd broken the transfer box, which is basically just shredded all of the gears inside. I say I'm lucky. This guy knows he's the only Land Rover mechanic within 100 miles. And he knows he's the only place that has the exact part I need on his shelf. Do you know how much I paid to fix my Land Rover? 12,000 euros. Yeah. You can just imagine me crying as I hand over the credit card and then sobbing as the charge is accepted. So, why am I telling this story? Somebody want to Hazard a guess? Don't let the problem... Was that somebody with a Yorkshire accent? Lancashire, close enough. Don't let the problem fester. Definitely, definitely. If I'd have fixed the problem when I'd noticed the oil on the ground, it would have cost me maybe €100. If I'd have stopped and fixed the problem when I heard that noise on the French motorway, it might have cost me a few €100, not €12,000. So whenever you see a difficult conversation in your horizon and you think to yourself, it'll be fine, it'll get better by itself, I want you to picture Andrew Murphy crying as he hands over his credit card at a Luxembourg motorway. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. Okay, that's enough fear. Before we move on to the model and going through how you actually resolve these difficult conversations, I just want to preface it with one thing. Often when I teach this kind of stuff in companies, somebody will say to me, oh, so you want me to be comfortable telling somebody they've been made redundant? No. No, I don't want you to be confident telling somebody that they've been made redundant. I don't want you to be confident. I don't want you to be comfortable telling somebody that they need to change their behavior. That's not what we're aiming at here. Comfortable means you've stopped caring about the other person. Comfortable means you care about yourself more than them, and that you don't care about the outcome for them. So I don't want you to take any of what I talk about tonight as trying to be preparing you to be comfortable with this type of stuff, because you won't. And I hope you never do, because it means you've stopped caring. But I do want you to be confident. Confident is different. Confident means you've prepared for it. You've thought about how it can go. You're trying to make the outcome as good as possible for the other person. You're confident, but you're not comfortable. Does the difference between those make sense? Yeah, cool. All right. So let's talk about what we can do about it. There's 2 words I want you to think about when you see a difficult conversation on the horizon. The first word is mindset, and the second word is preparation. So mindset is the way you think about the difficult conversation, the internal narrative, the story you're telling yourself about it. This can really, really shape how you approach it. How you think about something changes your responses to it. And so the mindset you have going into it can be really, really powerful. And in particular, one aspect of mindset is courage. When we fail to have a difficult conversation, 9 times out of 10, it's because we fail to have the courage to have it. Why do we think that can happen? What are the sort of things that can challenge the courage to have the difficult conversation? What if it doesn't go well? What if it's not received well? So fear of the outcome, definitely. Anybody else? What if the conversation makes it worse? Definitely, yeah. Somebody else? Yeah. Because sometimes you could go into a difficult conversation. Am I right or wrong? Is the opinion I have the valid opinion? Definitely. Anybody else? Last one? Yeah, fear of the consequences. Yeah. Yes. Somebody might escalate it. Yeah, definitely that can happen. Another thing that can challenge our courage is imposter syndrome. I suffer from imposter syndrome. I've been a leader, like I said, for well over a decade, and I still sometimes worry, did I get this job because I'm good at it or because I'm good at being interviewed? That thought crosses my mind. I see a couple of you are laughing. You know exactly what that feels like. I'm a pretty good talker, hence why I do public speaking, And so it genuinely worries me that I get my jobs because I'm just good at talking in the interview. So I suffer from imposter syndrome about this stuff, and imposter syndrome is one of the main reasons why I sometimes don't have difficult conversations. So in this vein of mindset and encouraging us to think about the difficult conversation in the right way, I want to give you some questions you can ask yourself, because the best way to change your mindset on something is to ask yourself questions and force yourself to answer them, to try and change that internal narrative by asking you to be introspective and think about it. So here are some questions. Just so I can contextualize these for you guys, hands up if you work at a consultancy. Okay, hands up if you work at a product company. For those of you who didn't put your hands up, who do you work for? Sorry? Nobody. Enterprise? Okay, so that's most of the third. Okay, cool. There's an even split. That makes my job hard. All right. Let's use the example. You're in a consultancy and you're like the senior or the lead, and somebody is in the client meeting looking at their phone as the client's talking. Anybody had that happen to them? Yeah, happens all the time. So let's use that as an example. You want to give somebody some performance feedback on that particular situation. Okay. I like to start off with trying to make you think selfishly for a second. Why is this in your best interest to have this difficult conversation? Why should you do it for you? How's it going to make your life better? So in my example, it could be because the client, if they see the junior playing with the phone, I'm going to be the one that they call. I'm going to be the one that is going to have that difficult conversation with the client. And I don't want that to happen to me. All right, it's tough. It's one thing to have that conversation with the person, it's another thing to have it with the client. And so it's in my best interest to talk to, let's pick a name, Jonathan. Sorry, any Jonathans in the audience. It's in my best interest to talk to Jonathan because I don't want to have that tricky, difficult conversation with the client. That's something we can say. Why is it in the best interest of the other person? So we've gone selfish, we now go in helpful for the other person. Well, it's in Jonathan's best interest because the client might be generating a negative impression of Jonathan. It's in Jonathan's best interest because Jonathan wants to get promoted, and I need to tell him about the behaviors that are expected of people who move beyond junior. It could be in Jonathan's best interest because this is just what professionals do. We don't sit in meetings looking at our phones. This is a great one for those of you in leadership or aspiring to leadership. Why is it in the best interest of the team for me to have this conversation? This kind of altitude hiring and trying to look at this from a larger perspective is a really great thing to practice if you have aspirations for leadership. So it might be in the best interest of the team because any behavior that I allow Jonathan to do is implicit ability for anybody else in the team to do the same thing. If I allow Jonathan to be in the meeting looking at his phone, then everybody else is going to think that's acceptable behavior. Or everybody else is going to look at Jonathan, know it's not acceptable behavior, and wonder why I let him get away with it. Then the last one is the credit card on the motorway question. What will happen if I don't have this difficult conversation? Let's end with a little bit of fear. So we start with selfishness. Why is it in my best interest? Move to the other person. Why is it in their best interest? Raise the altitude. Why is it in the team's best interest? And then end with a bit of fear. What will happen if I don't have it? So these questions are there to allow you to change your internal narrative about what's going on, to allow you to reposition the way you think about it, to hopefully get over that fear and to gain the courage to have the conversation. Any questions on that before we move on? No? Cool. So that was mindset. Then we got preparation. So preparation is all about the things we do to gather data, to gather opinions and perspectives. So what are some of the things that can happen in a difficult conversation if we don't prepare for it? If we just go, I'm just going to turn up and wing it. Yep. Yeah, definitely. So for those of you on the stream, if we prepare, it allows us to talk about more facts than opinions. I love that. It's hard to have a preferred outcome if you haven't decided what your preferred outcome is. Yeah. Somebody else? Last one. Nope. Cool. All right. Yeah, I love that. This stuff is all about making sure we know what we want to get out of it, and we know the best way to get it. That's pretty much what I mean by preparation. So some of the ways we can do that are gathering data and outside opinions. If you're going to state a fact in a difficult conversation, you sure as heck better be able to substantiate that fact. Otherwise, it's not a fact, it's an opinion. And understanding the difference between data and opinion is crucially important to having a difficult conversation effectively. It's fine to have opinions as long as you position them as opinions. If you confuse the difference between the two, you end up in a cycle that isn't productive and healthy. So gathering as much data as you can versus gathering outside opinions. So an example for this in the Jonathan situation might be, I am so sure that this is not acceptable behavior to be looking at your phone during one of these meetings, but I'm just going to check. I'm just going to talk to one of my peers. I'm going to talk to my boss. I'm just going to give myself the confidence that this is not the culture we want to build at Andrew Murphy Consulting. This is the type of stuff that you can gather. If it is an opinion, make sure that you yourself know it's an opinion, and just get it checked. If you have data, so for example, if you're saying something like you haven't pushed to the repo in 3 days, or the average size of your PRs are 10,000 lines of code, make sure that you've actually gathered that data. Something else we can do is thinking about possible objections. So how can this person object to what I'm saying? If we've done our job well in the categorization of data and opinion, then there should be a little here. But there's possibly things that could happen anyway. Like in my example with Jonathan, it could be that he said the reason why he was looking at his phone was because he had a family member in hospital, and he was checking to make sure that everything was okay. So are there potentially valid reasons why the person could be doing what they're doing, and how can you plan the conversation to make sure you take those into account? Crucial point here is asking them. It's hard for them to object when you've asked them a question. And lastly, based on the data and the opinions and the objections, what are the plans, and how can this conversation change and shift based on what they say? So you don't end up in a situation where you've gone into the difficult conversation and it goes a completely different way to what you expect. You've actually planned it. Okay. So again, another question people tend to ask at this point is, aren't you just teaching me to manipulate somebody? Well, yes, and. A lot of what I teach, communication skills, influence skills, you could look at as manipulation. But I like to think of them as persuasion rather than manipulation. Because remember those questions we started with in the mindset. Why is it in their best interests? If you can't answer, honestly, why it's in their best interests, you probably are manipulating them, not helping them. But if you can honestly, truthfully look in the mirror and know why it's in their best interest for you to do this, you're not manipulating them, you're helping them. And so that's the way I want you to think about it. All right. So we're rapidly coming to the end. And I just wanted, because I've talked a lot for the last 27 minutes, and I wanted to give you something to take away. So all of the questions that I've asked and more are in a PDF worksheet that you can take away. So this PDF worksheet has 3 pages, and don't worry, the QR code isn't going away. The first page is all about the logistics of the difficult conversation. So when you see something is happening, when you see this difficult conversation on the horizon, using this PDF to go, hang on a minute, I'm going to get in the right mindset, get in the right preparation, and logistically think about how I can do this. This steps you through all of that. So the first page is logistics, the what are you going to talk about, who is going to be involved in it, as few people as possible. When and where are you going to have it? In private, not 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. It's a good starting point. I once had a boss that asked me to make somebody redundant at 4:30 on a Friday. I said, no, I'm not doing that. That's just not fair. And then that boss said to me, if you don't do it, I will. I quit that job on the Monday. If your boss makes you do something like that, you don't want to work there. Then the next 2 pages are the questions we've been through. So, the mindset questions, why is it in my best interest? Why is it in their best interests? Why is it in the team's best interests? And what will happen if I don't do it? And then the last page is the preparation questions. So this worksheet steps you through everything I've talked about tonight. And what that means is whenever you see a difficult conversation coming, you can avoid the situation where we defer it and don't do it, and things get worse. And this is all aiming towards that idea of being confident, not comfortable. What are the questions you can ask? What are the mindsets you can gain in order to become confident and not comfortable? So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. Just quickly, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, the camera image is going over it, but that's what the QR code on the right is. If you missed the QR code for the worksheet, it's the one in the middle. And if you want to know more about what I do, that's the QR code on the left. Cool. So let's transition to Q&A, I guess.
Cool. I'd say in the interest of time, we may first just move to the next speaker. Sure. And if people have questions, maybe they can talk to you afterwards.
Sounds good with me.
Awesome. Thank you. That was a great talk, Andrew. So, our next talk is by Lorenzo Modesto, who's the CEO of 6pillars.ai, and has been in tech startups since the birth of the internet in the 90s. He'd expected that by 2023, automation would play a far greater role in cloud security posture management, or CSPM, if you're up to your acronyms, due to statistics showing that the majority of security issues in the cloud are directly related to misconfiguration. However, this wasn't the case. So I'm assuming we're going to learn how we can improve on that.
We're going to learn how you can improve. At least I can. It's going, isn't it? Yep. We're going to learn how we can improve on the interoperability of Apple products. Should be okay. Yeah, no, I'm not plugged in. That's okay. Because I don't want to put everyone through this fun. So what we can cover off in the meantime is that we will draw this drone tonight. So make sure when the QR code comes up that you zap it. And third time's a charm. Yes. Yes. Okay, we are on. Right, now I can plug in. Sweet. Okay, that should You get a picture? Great. That's to wake everyone up. Sound. Okay. Now I just need one more. I'm going to have to disconnect this and plug it back in, mate. Okay, cool. Got that. Yes. Okay. Right. This is thrilling for you guys, isn't it? That's nothing. I showed my desktop at the last user group chat, and yeah, it was like a blood sport of criticism on the number of tabs that I had open, which was more than 100 in one browser. So, okay, we are good. Thank for that. Hi everyone. I'm Lorenzo from Six Pillars. Today we're going to be covering off automation and specifically auto remediation in AWS. We're also going to be covering off how Novati Group, an ASX listed payment provider, has also adopted this as an early adopter of AWS native auto remediation. So we're going to head straight into it. This is the code to Zap. That is the drone. It's going to be going tonight. That's it. The fewer the people that go in the draw, the more chance there is. I don't know how the logic works on that. We'll be showing the code also a little bit later, but make sure you get in the draw and fill in your details. All good? All good. So, CodeSpaces. CodeSpaces was a thriving startup a few years ago, and this story actually comes from the ex-security pillar lead of the well-architected program in AWS, a gentleman by the name of Ben Potter, and this is one of the stories. He was actually at AWS when this happened. So they went from being a thriving company to literally insolvency. So administration, thanks very much for coming. Goodbye. 12 hours. How that happened was a combination of AWS misconfigurations, poor practices, manual processes, and their adversary was automated. So if you have a look at the time frames that are here, you'll see that in the space of 5 minutes, in less than 5 minutes, they went from a compromised console sign-in to deleted databases and terminated instances, terminating all instances. That's 5 minutes. So that's, the hair is going up on the back of my neck. It should be going up on the back of your neck too. Now what's interesting is that the misconfigurations, these are actually matching controls. So we basically use AWS native tools. One of the main ones is AWS Security Hub. And these are the matching controls that match with the behavior of this adversary. So you can see that had they actually been compliant with these controls, then, you can't say that they wouldn't have been compromised, but would they have been decimated? They probably wouldn't have. Would they have had a challenge? Yeah, potentially, but they may have actually known about it, and would also, more than likely, especially with something like MFA, it may well not have escalated at all. It may not have happened, but that's a maybe. Here are a few little red arrows. Now, security automation. It's interesting. It is coming, and the reason we know that it is coming is because, and specifically around automation that handles misconfigurations, we know that because AWS are doing it themselves. So, interestingly, the reasons why AWS are doing this is because essentially resourcing, teams, and compliance. You can do more with fewer staff, and that's essential right now. I get a little bit frustrated when a lot of people, they're sort of hanging on to manual process. Don't do that. Like, there is plenty of stuff. I'm sure there is plenty of value for you to add, especially the people from the consulting companies. There is so much value that you can add if you can automate away some of the manual stuff. But when it comes to misconfigurations, there's also a massive risk window that needs to be considered. So you can also do more valuable work with more junior staff. You can, interestingly, I had this shown by several customers, you actually mitigate a handover risk. Now, people join companies and leave companies all the time. There is always a handover. That handover is of varying quality and varying timeframes. But if you actually have someone who has set up automation and maybe specifically auto remediation, then what happens is that the handover risk is actually mitigated. Then we talk about team noise. So you're talking about less noise, and we will get to sort of the noise that is created by traditional CSPMs, if you want, or other security tools. There's an awful lot of alert fatigue, awful lot. So, I mean, we hear very, very common stories when new tools are deployed, specifically security tools. The first thing that happens is inundation with alerts. And essentially, if you can kill that noise and that alert fatigue, you will have happier teams. Finally, compliance. If you use automation, when you're talking about compliance with best practice configuration, what happens is that you remediate. Absolutely no problem to do manual remediation. And in some cases, it's absolutely necessary, because if not, you might break stuff. But you remediate once, and then you don't go on for this vicious circle of remediating multiple times. Maybe you have a compliance project, work really hard, you've worked your way through this list of remediations, you've gotten there, great, no one wants to talk about compliance or remediation for another 12 months. And guess what? There's been compliance drift between one compliance project and the anniversary. And that opens up the door to continuous compliance. So think about that and let continuous compliance sort of wash over you, because it is possible. So surely there are tools. That is an AI-generated image, I'll have you know. Thank Paul for that. Hands up, Paul. So here is just, look, some of these tools. These are excellent tools. I'm not heaping anything on these tools. But what they do is they do not focus on remediation. They focus on tracking, basically alerting on a deviation from best practice compliance. They will do a very good job, especially Wiz, of showing you an attack vector, of showing you basically an attack path and a vulnerability path that may be exploited. That's excellent. Palo Alto as well, they own a lot of tools. Prisma Cloud, they do have some remediation, but for the most part, the focus is on alerting. And that alerting creates noise. And when that noise is coupled with a workflow, as in an automated ticket generation workflow, what happens is that alert noise creates security tickets or remediation tickets. And that is automation that is being used to create work. That is not what automation is for. Please don't use it that way. And that ultimately is just, it's pain for teams that need to remediate these. And they need to, the vast majority of remediation is manual. And it may happen again. So how does AWS themselves fix this problem? And this is the meat in the sandwich of why we're here tonight. Meet Shazza. Hey, Shazza. So does anyone know Housos? Come on, this is Melbourne. It was like born here, wasn't it? No? Yeah, come on. Okay, Shazza is scary. But Shazza is actually AWS Security Hub Automated Security Response. It integrates with Security Hub. It's an automation framework and runbooks, including runbooks out of the box that can be used. And those runbooks, all they do, if you look up a particular control and you look up in Security Hub, let's say, okay, how do I, it's a control, it's maybe shut port 22 on a security group. Great. How do I remediate that? You can look up the documentation if you need to, or if a junior engineer needs to, and it will, the runbook, all the runbook will do is actually automate the steps in the manual remediation. That's all it does. It's all it's designed to do. But ultimately, it's also open source. So you can download this, you can have a play with it. It is a little bit non-trivial to deploy, but equally, it's there. It's been built by AWS to allow auto remediation or single remediation using automation, and integrates with Security Hub. So you can zap that if you want. Now, how Shazza works. So at the start of the talk, I'll actually just before I ask Stephen, our head of platform, to come up, how many? Who here wants a level 400 talk? You can be brave. Oh, you, yeah, ninja. Okay. Who here wants a level 300? Yep. Level 200. Yeah, is everyone here for level 100? Okay. All right. We're at this slide anyway, so we're going to have to get a little bit closer to sort of level 300 and 400, but that's all good. This is the meat and potatoes of how it works. Stephen Collette, please come up, and he's basically just going to walk you through a flow of how Security Hub automated security response works.
So, we'll just do it closer. All right. So fundamentally, there's two parts to ASR. So ASR has an administrative stack as well as a member stack. So the member stack can be deployed into the same stack as, or same region, same AWS account as the administrator one. But basically, in the administrator account, you're running Security Hub, and that takes in findings from guard duty, config, firewall manager. So it looks at the information based on controls and compliance standards, such as CIS, NIST, etc. Has a look at them and does an analysis on them. Then gets the findings from that. Once the findings find something that is misconfigured or misaligned, it sends the information across to a rule, and that rule is then triggering a step function. So that step function they describe as an orchestrator. So it orchestrates the way the process goes through the system, grabbing a control runbook, and then running the remediation runbook in the member stack. So this is all passing that across through cross-account roles, and then executing those to remediate the issue. So, closing down ports or shutting down buckets, etc. So once that's done, it then sends that information back into Security Hub, and then logs that information and contains an audit based around that particular finding.
Beautiful. Hands up who got that. Hands up who got that. Okay. You notice I'm not putting my hand up. So, anyway, the bottom line is this is the automation framework. This is the engine that we've based 6 Pillars Automate Plus, which is our product, on, and some of what we add to Shazza is simplifying this, is basically having a nice GUI, and we'll also touch on what what else we have added. I won't even inflict this slide on you, but this is what I'm basically talking about. So what we've done is we've built on AWS ASR, we've added availability, so we want to make sure that anyone who is using even one-off automation to reconfigure their environment, or even full autonomous auto remediation, we've got multiple safeguards that ensure that it will not impact availability. This is absolutely vital. And it's a big differentiator because the other tools, the other CSPMs, while they might have some auto remediation, the concept of auto remediation safeguards doesn't exist. So speed, we can deploy Shazza into an account in literally it's 1 minute of effort, and then it's fully automated. It automatically deploys and automatically configures the account and hardens, and it's done in 22 minutes. So done and dusted, but with 1 minute's effort, and it can be deployed to multiple accounts. Choice, we have more automation. We're the largest external Shazza contributor. Now, interestingly, the internal contributors within AWS are the AWS Professional Services team, AWS Support, and AWS Config. And AWS actually are using ASR to ensure that misconfigurations are auto-remediated, or in some cases there are workflows associated with these for Amazon infrastructure and for AWS infrastructure. So it's being used by them. Frameworks, we've got a few extra frameworks. We've got ISO 27001, SOC 2, NIST CSF, and some other bits and bobs. We're shifting left. We're going to be launching at the AWS Security Forum. We're going to be launching a template scanner. Now that essentially allows people to scan a CloudFormation stack or Terraform, CloudFormation or Terraform, to be able to scan that. And the most important part there is it's scanning, yes, for some vulnerabilities and for developer best practice or development best practice, but the most important part is that they're matching controls with the auto remediation. So if you have ensured compliance in your pipeline, then guess what? You're not actually going to break anything in production. Best practice. So we also integrate with the well-architected tool, and we also have a great integration with AWS FTR as the foundational technical review. If you're interested, great, come talk to me. If not, you don't know what that means, absolutely fine as well. Less noise. We do have integrations that will alert to Teams and to Slack, and soon to be Google Workspaces. They are pre-tuned to only alert on changes in in compliance. So when something goes from compliant to not compliant or non-compliant to compliant. That's really important, because if we didn't do that, every single one of our customers would get, including us, 500 alerts every single day. So it's actually one alert per control twice a day. And there are 250 controls, odd. And finally, our little special sauce, which is AI. And we allow customers to actually request and contribute automation to the automation library. So here we get to the lovely Navati group. I will welcome Karthik Murali, who is the information security specialist at Navati. And over to you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Hi, everyone. My name is Karthik, and I'm the information security specialist at Navati. Before I get started, has anyone here heard of Navati before? No takers? There's one, but I know they know. That's all right. Navati is essentially, we're a fintech company specializing in B2B financial solutions, such as prepaid cards, cross-border payments, and so on. Now, we are currently going through a cybersecurity uplift program internally, led by our CISO. And of course, a big part of the program is securing our cloud environment. All of our platforms are 100% cloud native and run completely in AWS. One of the first challenges we faced was the fact that platform owners and devs are constantly making changes in the environment. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing, as we want to encourage them to innovate and believe that security should always be an enabler and not an obstacle. The key here was for us to find a solution that worked alongside them to make sure they innovate in a secure manner. Of course, following on from this, if and when there are changes in the environment and that accidentally bring security misconfigurations, we previously would need someone to investigate it manually and work with the respective platform team and developers. This could often span over multiple calls and meetings. And this leads to taking up additional time and taking people away from important BAU tasks. And sometimes when a gap is closed, another one pops up in its place, meaning that the same remediation needs to be repeated, and that we are essentially chasing our own tail. And of course, compliance is really important to us. Operating in the financial services industry, which is a highly regulated industry, we adhere to security standards, in particular ISO 27001 and PCI DSS. And continuous compliance is absolutely crucial. Now that I've taken you through our initial state and backstory, I'll take you through our journey, our automation journey so far. We used to have a CSPM tool prior to this, and while it reviewed our environment and provided us with misconfigurations, it lacked features to automatically action them. And that sad face is my boss, the Sizer's face, every day when we had that CSPM tool. I'd have to report those horrible numbers, and yeah, we had a tough time with that. Now, since moving to 6 pillars, he's a lot happier, and it's good news for me because I'm happier. And one of the key differences with 6 pillars is the non-disruptive automation feature. It allows us to trust the platform. And I really want to double click on this point because this seemingly simple feature helps you get some quick wins. Now, what does non-disruptive automation mean? The 6 pillars team have identified certain auto remediation runbooks that are safe to execute and will not get in the way of your critical business assets. Examples of these types of remediations are encrypting your snapshots, creating logs, or creating alerts for those logs. Essentially, actions that cannot affect your core revenue generating platforms. So all your C-level people are happy, and they won't breathe down your neck if something goes wrong. The next step in our journey, we were then able to start turning on the auto remediation across other controls, preventing our previous issue of constant misconfigurations through changes in the environment. Basically plugging the gap and keeping it plugged instead of always chasing the next thing. And finally, as many environments are unique, there is a no one-size-fits-all approach. And this is where 6 pillars, AI, and custom remediation comes in, which we haven't really seen any other tool do, and really helps us out because every platform team and every developer works differently, and they've got different solutions, and therefore we need unique solutions to meet their requirements. And lastly, ultimately, we're now able to achieve continuous compliance in our AWS environment, which is part of our broader continuous security improvement program. I will now pass it back to Lorenzo to show you all the good stuff.
Thank you very much, Karthik. I'm actually going to leave this on this slide simply because this process of starting with with non-disruptive automation or non-disruptive runbooks, that's actually slightly more than half of our auto remediation or runbook library. And that's the largest runbook library, don't try to say that quickly, in AWS. And the process exactly that Karthik went through was starting off with the non-disruptive controls. Then they can move to looking at auto remediating the controls which might be more potentially disruptive, but that they're compliant with. So what happens is that it's not going to change anything because they're already compliant. But what will happen is that if there's agreement in the business, we don't want to ever not be compliant with these potentially more disruptive controls. And they might be, open port 22 to the world, open 3389 to the world. You wanted to sneak in that ransomware delivery port joke, didn't you? Okay. But yeah, you start with that. And all of a sudden, what happens is you've only got a subset of controls that you need to focus on. And those ones absolutely go through and determine, look, this workload, this application essentially requires a misconfiguration to be in place. And that's absolutely fine. But what happens is, because of the fact that you don't have to worry about the other ones, and also as you manually remediate the remaining controls, you can then backfill with auto remediation. And what happens is the auto remediation starts to act as a ratchet. So a company will simply get more and more and more compliant with best practice, and they're worrying about fewer and fewer misconfigured controls. And literally, they can either get to the point where you go, well, I'm either not going to remediate that, or I can accept it, and that's absolutely fine. You know, perfect example, great example of a non-compliant control, which is it's non-compliant, it's not best practice, but which is very popular, is an Open S3 bucket. So you shouldn't have Open S3 buckets. They shouldn't be publicly available. S3 is a magnificent web server. It's okay. You can just accept it. What we would do is probably turn off, okay, well, I don't want to have write access. And by the way, we've actually deployed decoys, because Fursy is the company that Ben Potter has started. Ben Potter supplied the Lapsus stuff at the very start of this presentation. We've deployed decoys with Open S3 buckets, and they're not just getting scanned. If you have an Open S3 bucket, just expect for someone to be in there messing about. So and again, hairs on the back of my neck have gone up. So, generative AI demo, I will try to do a smooth transition on this, but no guarantees. It's not too bad. I'll just take away my last pass. There we go. So, I'll just refresh that. That should be all good. Cool. So this is the actual tool. This is where we configure our automation. Do you want for me to zoom that out a little bit or in? Well, anyway, it's all good. So, and you can see, you can select, things like different frameworks, automation frameworks, or compliance frameworks. You can select well architected, etc., etc. But we're going to go and we're going to search for SNS.1. And there it is there. I am actually passed. And you'll see that when I expand this, if you can see that we've got every single instance there, it's drilled into this account, and we've also got links to remediation documentation. So this is what we were talking about, which is if you want to remediate it manually, just click on the documentation. Also, you can look at it in Security Hub, but what we're interested in is not that, is the ability to either remediate once, which you'll see is grayed out because it's compliant. I can't remediate it. But if it were non-compliant, I'd be able to hit remediate, and it will just remediate it once. It will run that runbook, and it will go through those remediation steps automatically. Or we can, if we had a runbook here, which we don't, but we're just about to create, we could also toggle it to auto remediate. So that is where it will be, if it's in a compliant state, it will be a change in compliance or misconfiguration will be detected in 2 minutes and then remediated in 30 seconds. And that'll happen 24/7 reliably. But what we want is we want to do a custom remediation, and literally, I'm just going to copy this. This is where customers can simply request, or us, we're actually, 6 Pillars is the biggest user of this tool right now, ourselves, and it's the reason why we've got the largest auto remediation library, because we've used this using natural language to simply request in natural language what I want to remediate and how I want to remediate it. So I want ensure topics, let's use a bit of decent grammar, encrypted arrest using KMS. Done. It's the super blue moon tonight. Great. So that has been requested. What has happened is that has, I've requested that. That's the first step. we have an NLP to automation engine, and that has gone into that engine and it has been processed. It has now generated the core of that new runbook. And what we then do, and granted there's part of this process which is manual at the moment, but what we then do is we quality control that. We then curate that. If we think that all of the rest of the customer base will get a benefit out of that, or in this case we're just creating a new runbook for an existing control, then we'll actually add that back into everybody else's automation library. And what we've done so far is 6 Pillars ourselves have used generative AI to create the largest, safest cloud security automation platform in AWS. There is the drone. This is the last screen. So I think right now we'll draw this, I think, afterwards, as in still tonight, don't worry. But please, I don't think we've actually got a huge number of respondents. I will have a look. We've got, yeah, it's not too bad. Yeah, it's still probably like a 1 in 10, 1 in 15 chance. So you see, that got you on the phone, didn't it? Okay, zap it there. And yeah, thank you very much. It's great fun.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Yep, that's fine. So, again, running a bit late. So if you have questions for Lorenzo, you can ask it in a bit. In the meantime, we'll just finish up. I will unplug this one. And cool. Yeah. So we have a marketplace segment. I explained this earlier. If anybody's hiring, please raise your hand. You'll get a microphone and say 30 seconds to say who you are, who you work for, what you're looking for, and then people can talk to you. Who is looking for people?
Sponsors first?
Sponsors first, if the sponsors...
No? Cool.
No.
Hello everyone. My name is Yong Kang Hee. I'm actually, same thing. I'm actually hiring volunteers. Okay, yeah, same thing. Nobody hiring, right? I'm running the Kubernetes meetup. So if anyone is interested to support us, yeah, feel free to join me. Okay, so the next meetup, that's the 12th of September in South Bank. Okay, yeah, if anyone need any more information, I actually also have the stickers. Yeah, come to talk to me. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. Anybody else? No? Well, that's a lot of difficult conversations. Then I'll just do the outro before Renzo quickly comes back to make somebody happy with a drone. As always, our gold sponsor CMD, our silver sponsors Versant and CIFO, as well as our beloved venue sponsor NAB for being here. Without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to do this, or we would be out there in the rain on a grassy field in a park without any drinks or food. Not as fun. So that's it. And our next meetup is, as usual, the last Wednesday of the month, which will be the 27th of September. Right here, same time, similar schedule. Box. And as always, a reminder, if you want to give a talk, please reach out. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.